Today on the 1012 podcast, you sickos asked for it, so you're going to get it. A nearly 2-hour episode because we have 3 great interviews. Sam Herder of Hero Sports here to preview Big 12 versus FCS, including the game I think is most likely for an upset. We've got 2 of the 3 hosts of the College Chaps podcast to talk about college football fans and the Big 12 overseas. And Ryan Nanni of the Shutdown Fullcast is here for a very Shutdown Fullcast-like interview.
When it comes to towing, seeing is believing. That's why Chevy Truck's advanced camera technology offers up to 8 available cameras for 14 unique views, so you can focus on the view that really matters. Chevrolet, together let's drive. Learn more about Chevy Trucks at Chevy.com. Safety or driver assistance features are no substitute for the driver's responsibility to operate the vehicle in a safe manner. Read the Vehicle Owner's Manual for important feature limitations and information.
This episode is brought to you by Experian. Are you paying for subscriptions you don't use but can't find the time or energy to cancel them? Experian could cancel unwanted subscriptions for you, saving you an average of $270 per year and plenty of time. Download the Experian app. Results will vary. Not all subscriptions are eligible. Savings are not guaranteed. Paid membership with connected payment account required.
Welcome to the 1012, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We are the flagship show of the 1012 Network. Find every podcast in the network at 1012network.com, TEN, the number 12, the word network. And of course, we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Philip Slavin. Thank you for the final episode of the off season. Technically, it's week 0 this weekend, but the Big 12 doesn't get going until next weekend. So next week is game week. When we are back on Monday, it will be game week. We'll be previewing games. It'll be time to talk football. We've been talking football, of course, but this is the final episode of the offseason. The offseason is finally coming to an end. I mean, it is finally, right? All of us, just finally. It's time. It's absolutely time. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because you sickos went on Twitter. I said I have 3 interviews. I overscheduled. And I got 3 interviews in the can that I needed to get out. And I said, do you want me to put all 3 of them in and have a 2-hour-long episode? Or should I just save one and only put it on YouTube? Well, you sickos, at least the 47 of you who actually voted, said, make a 2-hour episode. The majority of you said, make a 2-hour episode. So that's what we got. I have 3 interviews for you here today. Sam Herder of Hero Sports joins us as he does pretty much every year to do our Big 12 versus FCS preview. We're going to talk about the big ones. We'll run through the should obviously be wins pretty quick. Obviously, we're going to spend some time on South Dakota State, Oklahoma State, North Dakota State, Colorado, and the game that if I have to pick one for the Big 12 to lose, you'll find out which one that is. Then I have 2 of the 3 hosts of the College Chaps podcast. 3 Brits who host a college football podcast. They've been doing it for a while now. They are helping to grow the sport, the popularity of the sport over there across the pond. Very excited to have them on the show, get their thoughts on the Big 12, college football just overseas. Obviously, Kansas State and Iowa State will play in the game in Ireland next season. We kind of touch on that a little bit. That's something, I mean, they're very excited for that game. They've got a lot of thoughts on just the game in Ireland overall. And then we're going to wrap this show up with one of the hosts of the Shutdown Fullcast, Ryan Nanni, back on the show for a second time. Very excited. We're just going to talk about a bunch of random things. The weirdest matchups in the Big 12 this year. What is the funniest Big 12 championship game matchup that you could possibly think of? A very Shutdown Fullcast interview with Ryan Nanni. So they're all in here. Now, look, I'm going to drop the Ryan Nanni video of the interview on YouTube, our 1012 podcast YouTube channel, so you can go check that out there. If you just want to stick around for that, that is the last interview. You're going to stick around for it because I got 3 incredible interviews, 2-hour-long episode. Y'all wanted this, so you got it. And it's a great way to kind of, just get as much into you as you can before we just start talking games. Okay? A lot of great stuff. Speaking of a lot of great stuff, Charlie Hustle, our friends at charliehustle.com who love the Big 12 and are just cranking out incredible stuff before the season starts. Their countdown to kickoff started earlier this week. They've got some stadium tees that are, they're fantastic. The Kansas State one's good. The Jack Trice one is phenomenal. Colorado solid. The BYU and the Arizona State shirts are my favorites of the stadium tees they put out. I own a bunch of different hats. I've started a hat collection. I've got a few Big 12 schools. I've decided I need an Arizona State hat, and I need to find the devil logo with the pitchfork. He's on this shirt, and it's phenomenal. They've also got Cincinnati, and of course the Bounce House for UCF. They just dropped more new Letterman jackets for you. Just about every Big 12 school's got a new one available. If you're an Iowa State, Kansas, or Kansas State fan, they've got multiple options for you, a couple different Oklahoma State options as well. So, and of course, the greater than 12 t-shirt and sweatshirt that you need to get is still on the site, and it's incredible. So go shop, and look, there's more to come. There is more that's going to keep coming out. So do yourself a favor. Use the promo code 101215, TEN1215, and get 15% off all non-sale items. They're also offering free shipping on all orders of $125 or more. So go load up. Load that cart. Get you some Cincinnati gear. Get you some Colorado gear. Get you some Arizona State gear. Get you some UCF gear. Or just grab a few different schools so you can represent the Big 12 wherever you go, like me. Load it up. Use that promo code 101215, TEN1215. It really helps us out. We love Charlie Hustle. They love the Big 12. They're putting out incredible stuff. Just go to charliehustle.com and shop around for all the great Big 12 gear. Get yourself ready for the season. Keep yourself looking and feeling good. Charlie Hustle, vintage made fresh. All right, like I said, 3 great interviews. Absolutely great. This is the most fun Big 12 FCS season we've ever had, as far as I can tell. And so it's a great conversation with Sam, our friends from across the pond. I got to get him back. I could have done a 2-hour episode just with them. And of course, Ryan Nanni is, look, if you listen to Shutdown Fullcast, you know. If you're an old SB Nation person, you know. The guy is phenomenal and hilarious. And it is as much fun and funny an interview as I expected. So you asked for it, you got it. 1 long episode, 3 great interviews. Let's get to it.
At BlueNile.com, you can find endless ways to make your moments sparkle. From classic and timeless jewelry gifts to creating the custom engagement ring of her dreams. All at prices you won't find at a traditional jeweler. And right now, you can save up to 40% on fine jewelry and 25% on engagement ring settings during the Blue Nile Anniversary Sale, going on now. Go to BlueNile.com to shop the Blue Nile Anniversary Sale and save up to 40%. That's BlueNile.com.
This is one of my favorite interviews to do every year. And look, it's not because everyone clicks on it and loves it. It's because I just enjoy having this conversation. It's fun. And the last few years, we haven't had a whole lot to really talk about because the Big 12 has done a good job of avoiding good FCS opponents. There was a stretch from 2013 through 2018 where a Big 12 team got upset by an FCS team every year. They have avoided that for the last few seasons. This year, however, the Big 12 it's like the Big 12 stopped scheduling really good FCS teams in the non-conference because it doesn't help you. But they did. I don't know why, but they did. And so to break down what should be a very interesting Big 12 FCS slate is our favorite FCS guest, Sam Herder of Hero Sports. Sam, welcome back to 1012, friend.
Hey, it's great to be back on. I enjoy these episodes every year as well. And we were talking off air that last year the slate was, I don't know, it was okay, but not great. This year we have some really, really intriguing matchups. So looking forward to our conversation.
There are, based off the preseason top 25, 6 ranked teams on the schedule, 6 ranked FCS opponents, and 2 who are among the receiving vote category. Arizona State and Houston, no FCS teams on their schedule. Arizona State probably could have used one, but that's okay. I want to run real quick through the ones where I don't see any sort of like upset potential these aren't ranked teams. Like, it would be very shocking if something happened here. We can kind of go in chronological order. Week 1, you got UCF versus New Hampshire, Kansas versus Lindenwood, Utah versus Southern Utah, Cincinnati versus Towson. I'm going to go ahead. I know Utah Martin is receiving votes, but I'll say Kansas State, Utah Martin, Texas Tech, Abilene Christian. And then week 2, you get TCU, Long Island, and Arizona versus Northern Arizona. Of course, Northern Arizona, again, receiving votes. But to me, I don't see of anything of real interest in any of those matchups. Do you?
Not really. New Hampshire has been a pretty consistently good FCS program, but they lost their star quarterback to Minnesota and their star running back to the NFL. Southern Utah should be pretty good this year. I think they're kind of on my under the radar, but they're playing a really good Utah team. After that, UT Martin receiving votes, pretty quality FCS program, but Kansas State should do just fine there. It wasn't that. It was a few years ago, I believe, when Northern Arizona beat Arizona. And that wasn't even a very good Northern Arizona team that year. So, I don't think Arizona's going to have much of a problem with NAU. But, I think that this is a fair list to kind of just go through quickly and not talk too in depth about.
Yeah, I believe that was 2021.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yes. I've got the list. Look, there's typically an FCS over FBS upset every single year, COVID aside, because they only played like 2 of those. But there is typically a upset every year. I'll get your thoughts on what you like as far as a potential FCS Power 4 upset here in a bit. Let's go through some of the ones that are a little bit more interesting. I want to get your thoughts on them. Let's start with a game in week 2. West Virginia facing off against Albany. They are the preseason number 14. I went through Hero Sports list of like top returning players in the FCS this year. They have an offensive lineman in Ozzie Hutchinson that made the list. Look, I have high expectations. I think West Virginia is going to be a good team this year. Like, I'm already planting my flag of West Virginia over Penn State week 1. So I'm not really concerned with them with Albany. But is there anything interesting about this matchup to you?
If this was last year, I think it could be pretty interesting. Albany was a semifinalist last year, but they lost a lot. Essentially, their entire defense. Albany had a legit front 7 last year, a really good linebacker, really 2 really good defensive ends. But I mean, they were basically replacing their entire defense this year. And offensively, Albany, they have 4 returning starters on the offensive line. I really like their running back, Griffin Waddell. He's a pretty solid running back. But Albany, their starting quarterback transferred to Miami. Their top 2 or 3 wide receivers are all gone as well. I think they all declared for the NFL draft. So Albany is a team that lost a lot, and they're bringing in a lot of transfers. So it's really hard to kind of analyze this Albany team because they have there's so much turnover on that roster.
Moving to week 1, let's go. We're going to save North Dakota State, South Dakota State here towards the end, folks. So just be patient. On Saturday in week 1, we've got Baylor versus number 21 Tarleton State. They have really raised the profile of this program up quite a bit. They have number 2 returning running back Kayvon Battle and number 9 returning wide receiver Darius Cooper in the FCS. Look, this is a Baylor team where head coach is on the hot seat, Dave Aranda. Coaching changes. Quarterback brought in from the transfer portal. It's a big season for Baylor. I don't see an upset here, but it is one at least to keep an eye on to me.
Yeah, Tarleton is interesting because they have this is a 500-foot view, but they have very high aspirations. Tarleton State, they just finished their transition from D2 to D1, so this is their first year. They are playoff eligible. Tarleton, I think, went 8-3 last year, and they have kind of expectations beyond the FCS. I mean, they're openly talking about they want to. If Conference USA ever has to add again, Tarleton State is putting their name out there as, hey, we think we would be a good target for Conference USA. So they're already looking beyond the FCS. But in the meantime, I do think Tarleton State can build themselves up to being an FCS contender. I can see a playoff team this year, then slowly, building their way up to making deeper playoff runs. They returned basically their entire team from last year. Defensively, they weren't that good defensively last year, so that's obviously a concern. But there's a lot of offensive firepower for Tarleton. They have 2 running backs on their team right now that have all gone for over 1,000 yards at one point in their career. Daryl Kelly a couple years ago went over 1,000 yards. Kayvon Britton is one of the very best running backs in the FCS. So very, very good offensively for Tarleton. Question marks defensively, but overall a veteran team that is looking to make noise this year, at least on an FCS playoff level.
Typically, when you get these upsets, it's because the defense on the FCS team is good enough to kind of hold the P4 offense down. That's what typically. I mean, we've seen some 31-24 kinds of games, which obviously is some offense. You've got to be able to score, but it tends to be because you have an FCS team who comes in with a really good defense who's able to actually have some impact. So if you've got a Tarleton team who's great offensively, not great defensively, I have a hard time seeing an upset there. Let's go to Iowa State facing off against number 22 North Dakota, not to be confused with North Dakota State. All those Dakotas, South Dakota, North Dakota, and NDSU, SDSU are all real good. So, they have the number 3 returning wide receiver in FCS, Bo Belquist. Look, Iowa State's been upset by FCS teams before. It wouldn't be a first, but I don't think I would peg it here. And I do think, like Iowa State, Matt Campbell doesn't care as much about non-conference. They tend to not get up for these non-con games in week 1. I wouldn't be shocked if Iowa State was in a close game. It's not because I think Iowa State isn't good. It's just because that tends to be how Matt Campbell plays these kinds of things. But I don't see like be careful.
Yeah, UND is. I think they're going to have a slow start to this season. The cupboard is, I don't want to say completely bare, but they did lose quite a bit this offseason. They only bring back 4 starters on defense. Their offensive line loses 4 starters. Their starting quarterback transferred to Michigan State. I really like Bo Belquist, that wide receiver you mentioned. He's one of the best receivers in the FCS. Gavin Zebarth is a really good running back for them. I think he's actually really underrated running back in the FCS, a really physical runner for UND. But, question marks on the offensive line, entire started defensive line has to be replaced. I mean, UND is they're always a consistently good, solid FCS program. They actually kicked the crap out of NDSU last year, which was shocking to a lot of people, but then they kind of fell off and couldn't capitalize on that momentum and bowed out pretty early in the playoffs. So UND, solid FCS program. They'll be in the playoff mix this year. I just don't think they have the overall depth and the overall, especially the play in the trenches to go to Iowa State and frankly be competitive. I think this could be a pretty comfortable win for Iowa State.
You'd like to see it. It's just, Matt Campbell doesn't care about non-con. At least that's the way he coaches it. I want to talk about one where if I had to pick a FCS over Big 12 upset and I had to put money on one to happen, really sorry, BYU fans. Number 11, Southern Illinois, heading to BYU. They've got the number 14 returning linebacker in Colin Bonek, number 15 returning wide receiver in Vincent Davis III. I just, this would be the one, I understand we're going to talk about OSU and Colorado in a minute. This would be the one I would probably go ahead and put the money down on.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and the Salukis have 2 FBS wins in a row. Last year they beat Northern Illinois. 2022, the Salukis beat the Big Ten's Northwestern, and so the Salukis get up for these type of games. I think the Salukis always have really good individual talent players where, you look at some of the players and you go, okay, that guy looks the parts. He moves well, he fills out the pads well. He has next level kind of a look to him, and they do a pretty good job sending guys to the NFL. So they recruit really well and they develop really well. And just an overall, a really athletic team. And I think that's why they usually are pretty competitive against FBS opponents, because they're not necessarily outmatched physically or athletically and all that. This year's SIU team has question marks. Multi-year starting quarterback is gone. Their offensive line is pretty experienced. They have some good wide receivers coming back. Their running back room will be pretty new. Defensively is where Southern Illinois was really strong last year. they only bring back like 4 or 5 starters, and so there's a lot of holes to fill defensively for the Salukis. But this is one game that you can maybe say is the most likely FCS over Big 12 win. I don't think Southern Illinois is better than South Dakota State or better than North Dakota State, obviously, but I just think matchup wise, this could be a closer game than maybe some people expect. Because a lot of people, obviously, if you go through this list, a lot of people will point to North Dakota State and South Dakota State as, oh, those are two teams that could potentially get FBS wins. But I'm with you. I kind of look at this Salukis versus BYU game.
All right, so let's talk about these two big ones, the ones that everyone's got circled. I mean, you've actually got Vegas betting lines for two games involving FCS teams, which makes sense when you have, the two-time defending FCS national champs and the most well-known FCS program amongst everyone at this point. So let's start with the game on Thursday between Colorado and preseason number 2 North Dakota State. They bring back Logan Kopp at linebacker, quarterback Cam Miller, offensive lineman Gray Zabel as the guys who've been of note that I found in the lists. Like I know this is going to be a popular upset because Colorado, I understand North Dakota State doesn't matter who's the head coach, they just continue to be this preeminent FCS program. But I feel pretty comfortable in saying, I would expect Colorado to win this game. It could be a competitive game, especially early on, but I think Colorado should expect to beat North Dakota State this year.
I definitely think that's fair. And with that said, even if the Bison were to win, I mean, yeah, it would be an upset because of the scholarship differential, and Colorado is depending on where you look, Colorado is a 9 to 10 point favorite. So it would be an upset, but it wouldn't be a shocker, right? The Bison are 9-3 against FBS opponents. They've won 6 in a row up until losing a couple of years ago to Arizona. So it won't be a shocking upset, but I'm with you that I don't know how much Colorado is going to win by. It could be by 3 points. It could be by 21 points or anything in between. None of that would surprise me. Now, 38-7, I don't think it's gonna be that type of blowout, but this matchup is so interesting because obviously you have NDSU, who, even though South Dakota State has taken the mantle as the best FCS team, NDSU is still the best FCS program, just with their lineage of national championships. They're the most well-known program in the FCS. And of course, Colorado, a lot of media attention around Colorado, with obviously Deion Sanders and the transfers he's bringing in and all that. And so you see a lot of national accounts, whether it's national football writers, national college football, just Twitter accounts in general. Whenever they tweet about those games, I always click on the comments just to see what people are saying. And there's a lot of opinions. Some people are saying, oh, Colorado is going to roll. There's also a lot of people saying, oh, NDSU is going to win this game. But I feel like the people that are saying that the Bison are going to win this game are just viewing NDSU as the NDSU football program and not looking at NDSU as the 2024 Bison team, because this Bison team has question marks. Their best running back from last year is gone. Their top 2 wide receivers from last year are gone. They only have 2 returning starters on the offensive line. Defense returns quite a bit for the Bison, even though the defense was a bit up and down last year. But their starting safety, Cole Wisniewski, sounds pretty doubtful to play against Colorado. Potentially even could be a season-ending foot surgery that he has to go through. And Wisniewski he might be one of the best safeties in all of college football, not just FCS. PFF really likes him. NFL draft analysts really like him as well. Potentially a day 2 draft pick for Cole Wisniewski next year. But again, he had off-season foot surgery. Doesn't sound like he's recovering as quickly as they expect. So he's not 100% ruled out just yet against Colorado, but it sounds pretty doubtful that he'll play. And that's a major, major loss. So I don't know where the NDSU, because when NDSU has beaten FBS teams in the past, they've basically just run all over those FBS teams. I don't know if they have the rushing attack to do that this year. And I don't know if the NDSU linebackers in secondary, while find a good at an FCS scale when they're playing against Shadir Sanders and Travis Hunter, I don't know if they have the overall athleticism to slow this Colorado team down for all 4 quarters.
Yeah, but when you look at the NDSU and SDSU roster, especially North Dakota State. Like, North Dakota State is in the FCS, but North Dakota State's kind of program, if they jump to FBS next year, they would win games. They would immediately win games, especially if they were in like a Conference USA. Like, they would give Liberty an absolute run for their money for that conference championship game in year one. There is talent, FBS level talent on that roster. So it's not like, oh, it's FCS talent. No, like, they send players to the NFL. Like, even with the transfer portal and the impact that it has on FCS and FBS, like, they still keep talented rosters. South Dakota State. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but
No.
I had a number last week, or I saw a number last week. I can't remember the specific number, but I think NDSU has 18 players on NFL rosters right now, which is more than a majority of Group of 5 teams. So yeah, like you said, they do send a lot of talent to the NFL.
Yeah. And I will note Bill Connolly's SP Plus projections, the last one he put out about 5 days ago, where he ranks everything, like all the way down to like NAIA. He had North Dakota State number 62nd overall. Like, it's one spot behind Colorado. It's a spot ahead of Illinois, 2 spots ahead of Cincinnati. Like, there's plenty of FBS teams. The last ranked FBS team is Louisiana Monroe at 185. North Dakota State's at 62nd. Like, this is a quality roster that would win quite a few games at the FBS level. The highest ranked team, both in the preseason poll and for Bill Connolly's SP Plus, which I think is worth saying, is South Dakota State at number 50, which is, I mean, it's 30 spots behind Oklahoma State, but you got a 2-time defending FCS champs. They bring back quite a bit. I mean, the list from you guys is returning production. Running back Amar Johnson, linebacker Adam Bach, quarterback Mark Gronowski, wide receiver Griffin Wild, 2 offensive linemen in Evan Bernstein and Gus Miller. Like, yes, South Dakota State lost. They had a lot of players come back last year, which is why they were able to repeat. They did lose players. But, and Oklahoma State, similarly, is a team that can tend to start slow in the non-conference, as we've seen the past few years, and not just put teams away, including FCS opponents. Like, I do think we will have a game. I do think we could have a game heading into the third quarter here. I expect Oklahoma State to win, but it's not going to be a not competitive game to me for a while.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a battle. I really do. It's going to be a 1-possession game, if not tied, late in the fourth quarter. Yeah, South Dakota State lost a lot from last year, but they also bring back quite a bit as well, which is a sign of obviously a good program in general, but especially at the FCS level, where 63 scholarships compared to 85 at the FBS level. It's just so hard to reload. And I mean, South Dakota State, they lost like 20 some seniors last year, which is a lot. They also lost 6 offensive guys that signed NFL contracts this offseason, a couple draft picks, a couple of undrafted free agents as well. Yet they still have like 28 seniors on this year's roster. So they just have an ability to retain players and develop players. Because I mean, a couple of years ago, Tucker Kraft was getting 6-figure NIL offers from Power 5 schools. Last year at this time, or last summer, last spring, last offseason, I should say, it was Isaiah Davis. This offseason, Mark Gronowski the quarterback was getting big time NIL offers to go to potentially Big Ten schools. He decided to stay. So it's still a really good looking roster. And, I think if it was last year, I would possibly even pick South Dakota State to pull off the upset. But they do have, some holes to fill, a few spots on the offensive line to replace on the starting offensive line. I think the defense should be really good for South Dakota State. To me, I think South Dakota State is going to play well. Like, they're going to play good defensively. They're not going to make a lot of mistakes offensively. To me, it's kind of about how Oklahoma State plays, because if they play to their full potential, I mean, they're one of the better teams in all of college football. But last year, was it South Alabama that beat Oklahoma State?
Yeah.
And then also Central Arkansas, I believe it was Central Arkansas, played Oklahoma State pretty close, like a one score game. And that Central Arkansas team didn't even make the playoffs. So Oklahoma State can't have the mindset, more so the players and the coaches, they can't have the mindset of, oh, let's play down to the FCS level. If we just kind of go through the motions, we give 85%, we're going to win this game because it's FCS. Well, you can't have that mindset against South Dakota State, because all of a sudden the Jacks jump up on you and South Dakota State is up 10 points. all of a sudden things can unravel. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, that South Dakota State is going to jump up early. I just think Oklahoma State, the players need to have the right mindset going into this game.
Oh, if I'll say it now. At some point in this game, South Dakota State will have a lead. They will have a lead in this game. I don't know if it's they score first or they come out in the first drive of the third quarter and take a lead. Like, it's not going to surprise me when South Dakota State takes a lead in this game and everyone's sweating and frustrated and forgetting, like, this is a good team. And OSU start slow. Even with everything they have returning, like, they tend to start slow. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch these two games, the Colorado, Nebraska, the Oklahoma State, South Dakota State. Colorado, North Dakota State. Sorry. We do have Colorado, Nebraska as well. Looking at ESPN, Colorado's a 9-point favorite over North Dakota State, and Oklahoma State's a 10-point favorite over South Dakota State. That's like, when you get lines for an FCS game, you would fully expect to see something of like 2, 3, 4, 5 touchdowns. That's why I don't typically put out Vegas lines. So the fact that there are betting lines for these two games should set your expectations for, these are not normal FCS teams. These are teams that if they came up to the FBS level would be competing, making bowl games in year one and having success. So they will be interesting. I don't know what Colorado and OSU were thinking when they put these on the schedule, but they did. So, Sam, I do want to end on this. Like I said, every year we typically see an FCS over power conference team, P4 now. If you had to pick one FCS over P4 upset this year, what one would you pick?
Yeah, I think I already tipped my hand. I think I look at that Southern Illinois BYU game, but I do think North Dakota State probably has a better chance to beat Colorado than South Dakota State has of beating Oklahoma State, even though I do think on the field South Dakota State is better than North Dakota State. So I would look at as kind of those three. Honestly, I don't really see any other games in any of the other power conferences that catch my eye. I'm just going through my list of most likely FCS over FBS wins, and South Dakota State, North Dakota State are listed, but everything else is group of 5 teams. Eastern Washington, Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, Lafayette, Buffalo, UT Martin, Kennesaw State, Central Arkansas State, Sac State, San Jose State, Fordham, Bowling Green. And then week 0, actually this week, Montana State is actually a 10-point favorite over New Mexico. Obviously we're talking group of 5 here, but I think a lot of, the number of FCS over FBS wins, they range kind of depending on the matchups. Last year there was only 4, but you go back to 2021, there was 12. So it's kind of all over the place. Most of the time these wins are going to be over group of 5 teams, over Power 5, now Power 4 teams. So I think FBS wins this fall, but a majority of them, if not all of them, are going to be over a group of 5 teams.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, most of the time it's G5. There's usually one power conference upset.
Yep.
So,
like last year, Sac State beat Stanford last year for a Power 5 win.
Yeah, and so it'll be interesting to see, because usually, we say it's an upset, and you can, like, I know technically North Dakota State and South Dakota State winning would be an upset, but to me, like, it's also like, okay, I forget who Virginia's playing. Like, that's the kind of situation where you go, oh, didn't see this one coming. So, Sam, appreciate it as always. This is always a fun conversation. Do me a favor. You are my favorite go-to for FCS coverage. Where can everybody find all the work you do covering FCS?
Yeah, I appreciate that. The website, herosports.com, we cover the FCS and the group of 5. And then I'm on Twitter or X at Sam Herder FCS.
Everybody go give Sam a follow, especially as we enter into these Big 12 FCS matchups. Sam, keep doing what you do, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you for having me on.
For longtime listeners, you all know that we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. And so when I found that there is a college football podcast hosted by 3 Brits from across the pond, I just said, oh, I have to get them on. Like, this is a must. This is a must do. And they talk about all things American college football. And so why not get some people with a very different perspective to come in and talk about this new 16-team Big 12 conference. And so I am very excited to have two of the three hosts of the College Chaps podcast, Oli and George. Welcome to the 10-12, guys.
Thanks very much for having us. We really appreciated the invite, so thank you.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to be on. An exciting time for the Big 12 as well, I think. So I'm really looking forward to talking about, as you say, this new look 16-team conference and college football in general.
This is kind of fun because there's actually a German Big 12 podcast that's hosted by an OU and a Texas fan that we've had on before. So I'm like, okay, now we got Germany. We're gonna have England. Let's just see what other countries I can find who love college football, because it apparently has fans everywhere across the country.
How's that Big 12 podcast going to work now with Texas and Oklahoma now out of the Big 12? That sounds like a divorce in the making, does it not?
I haven't asked them about that. I'm gonna have to reach out and be like, so where do your loyalties follow OU in Texas, or are you gonna stick with? Which is a weird thing. We'll get to things we prepare in a second, since you brought this up. Which is a weird thing of like, there's a lot of like national sports media guys who are OU grads who have covered the Big 12, and they're like, well, we still are going to stick with the Big 12 because we loved the Big 12 and like that's what they know is this conference. But it's like, but you talk OU a lot and you have your OU bias. How does that gonna, like, I'm really interested to see how like OU biased guys who are going to stick with the Big 12 now talk about the Big 12 without Oklahoma in it.
Perhaps less biasly. Like they'll open themselves up to thoroughly enjoying the conference rather than talking about OU potential to win it every year. Maybe that'll make for a better environment for all concerned.
If it's anything like our podcast, we can talk about Texas because our Texas co-host isn't on the call. When Texas are doing well, Texas seems to get into the conversation a lot, but when they're not doing so well, it kind of disappears into the background. So maybe, if Oklahoma make a splash in the SEC, they become, prevalent, even though it's not Big 12. And if they don't, then maybe, Kansas Jayhawks get more airtime.
I love it. Okay, so we got to start by asking you guys how you got into college football. How did you guys decide to start an American college football podcast?
What, do you want to go first, Ollie?
I don't mind going first. Don't mind at all. So I, like most fans of American football in the UK, I started with the NFL. So I'll be honest, like 100% honest, I didn't get American football at all. Like my uncle's a big Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan. He passed the game down to my brother, who is a big New York Giants fan, and they were trying to get me into the sport, and I didn't get it at all. I just did not understand it. But once they sat me down and watched a couple of games, played some Madden, started to understand the nuances of the sport, I was like, I was hooked. And the natural progression of being an NFL fan through the NFL draft is college football. I was at a house party one New Year, and they'd got the channel that carried college football in this country, and they'd got a game on. It would have been a New Year's Six. I think it was Boise State playing, and I was blown away by the fact there was 80 to 100,000 people watching college kids. There's no equivalent. George will tell you, something we talk about on the podcast with American guests when they ask us is, there is no equivalent in England. So to see something like that just absolutely blew my mind. And as I got into the nitty gritty of college football and discovered what it truly means to the people that are involved, the whole broad scale of college football, the pageantry, the pride, the passion, everything that goes into it, I was blown away. And I absolutely loved it. And I was looking one day on social media, there was an advert for voluntary contributors to a website in the UK. Started doing that, and that's where I met George, working voluntarily, just writing articles for a website. And I'll let George take the story from there and put how he got into college football and where those two journeys met together.
Well, I guess, most people in this country and in Europe, I think, find the game in the way that Ollie's just described. I'd been traveling to the States a lot. I've got friends in the US at that time, I have to say, predominantly on the West Coast. And to Ollie's point, when you see a college game on TV and there's 100,000 people at it, it doesn't make rational sense to us, because college sports, I mean, our other co-host, who we seem to be talking more about him than anything else, he's a volleyball coach in the UK. Now they do get an audience, but it'll be in the hundreds rather than the thousands. And I played university sports, but nobody. It's a social thing. You go, you play your game, and then 22 people go off to the pub and have a drink. There's nobody watching the game. So to watch these games on the TV, and it just doesn't make any sense. And in fact, I was flying back from Las Vegas, and somewhere on my trip, I picked up a sweater, and it had a Michigan M on it, and I didn't know that Michigan had played Notre Dame that weekend, and I think Notre Dame had won. And this very vociferous Notre Dame fan told me in no uncertain terms what he thought of Michigan in the middle of McCarran Airport. And again, it was just one of these things where you're like, this doesn't make any great sense to us. And I think when you start to get into the nuances and we're probably going to talk about this, but the kind of the passion and the history and the rivalries and everything that goes with it, the NFL doesn't compare well against that. So even though the NFL is well established in the UK and Europe, we're now seeing a real groundswell of interest in the college game. But to end Ollie's kind of story, three of us ended up writing about college football for the one media outlet. We did all of this on a voluntary basis. I believe we were the only ones writing about college football at that point in the UK. I'm sure someone will contest that, but it was some time ago. And the website had an NFL podcast, and they asked us to jump on to the podcast. And I think I speak for all of us that none of us were particularly interested in talking about football. We much preferred to write about it. And we did a kind of one-off. And we realised that we had an interesting dynamic, because I don't know if you can pick up from the accents, but I come from Scotland. Ollie comes from the very heart of England. He's right in the middle, and Alex is from just outside London. So we've got very different accents. Dare I say it, somewhat different perspectives on life. So the podcast then started to build some momentum, and we now, going from that one point where we didn't want to be on a podcast, we're now going into our 6th year on the podcast. So we've been doing it for some time, which is where the grey hair comes from, to be honest.
I mean, I gotta say that the show is great. You've had some absolutely fantastic guests on. Marty Smith's been on, Andy Staples has been on. You've had the Mountain West Commissioner on. Like you guys have been able to get some really good guests on. I mean, I'm sure for the guest, it's an opportunity to reach a new audience and kind of help grow the sport for people who are, I'm sure you have many people who come on and find your podcast and then start to learn more about college football and are starting to kind of fall in love with it because of it. But like, where do you guys kind of see your role there in England as far as like building and connecting with this growing, as you mentioned, kind of fan base of college football fans there overseas?
Look at George. George's going to sit back and let me answer every question first, and then swoop in afterwards.
But we're not very good at this, because we're normally the ones asking the question, right? So we're just going to sit back and.
I also think as well, we're not particularly great at self-promotion. We've talked about this internally. We don't do a lot of shouting, and you mentioned some of the guests that we've had on, and we don't do a lot of shouting and roaring about the things that we have done, and maybe we should do more of that. But I think certainly the dynamic that we have, the outlooks that we have on college football, our ability to string a sentence together pretty well and have pretty decent knowledge on college football, I think it does help, particularly people who are new to the college game in this country. I do think it helps to kind of give them an idea of what the sport is all about, I think it helps to bring together people who might not know other people who enjoy college football. And it's so I think in that respect, it's not so much as seeing our role as something, it's just kind of we've kind of happened into being this podcast that has a decent listener base, who we've been lucky enough to interact with some of our followers, some of our listeners, quite frequently. We've got a certain amount of people who are avid listeners who we've also met in person. I was out in. We have a guy called Stephen who is a big Notre Dame, ironically, a big Notre Dame fan from Ireland, and I was able to meet up with him a couple of years ago at the Nebraska Northwestern game in Dublin. So yeah, it's I think when we have the guests that we have on, I think it legitimizes the college football as a national brand. Because like you say, there are people who are interested in coming and finding out more about the opportunities to develop the game overseas. And I think we have been very lucky in that respect.
I think there's also there's another couple of points which I'd be keen to kind of point out, because as Ollie said, we're not very good at self-promotion. But when we started out, I mean, we typically don't track our numbers, to be perfectly honest. We've always worked on the basis that we would just do this on an organic basis. We're not interested in doing a lot. One thing that we do know is that we've probably got as many listeners in the US as we've got in the UK. So I think that tells that we broadcast to a wide spectrum, or we appeal to a wide spectrum of people. And I think that's down to the fact that from day one, we've had to work really hard to be credible. You know, I think I remember one tweet in particular which said, three Brits talking football, I can't believe this kind of idea, right? And just so happened that our guest had come back and said, yeah, and they really know their stuff. But we've had to work hard at that, because I think, you know, I don't mean this in a disingenuous way, but if you guys are talking about something and you make a mistake, then, you know, someone might not pick it up. But if we say something, then people tend to latch on to it. So I think that, and I think when we started out, no one was listening to us. So to your point about our part in all of this, last year, television rights in the UK fell away for college football. ESPN player decided to move out of this space. And we had a void. We went into the start of last season. There was no college football legally available via TV, whether that was cable or satellite. And we'd put out a kind of open letter on Twitter. I think it might still be on our X page. And that became, I guess, when we realised how much of I'm careful what we say here, because we're not trying to influence anything, but how much of a magnet it became for people who were really frustrated about not having somewhere to watch football. And I think that was probably the first time that we realised how many people in the UK wanted to watch or were watching college football. So I think we've got a part to play. And, you know, Ollie's been across in Ireland a couple of times now. I'm not long back from SEC media days, and I think when we're out and about, our job, if you like, is to let people know, particularly schools, know that there is a very fast growing fan base who wants to watch their schools. And I think now we're starting to see the schools realizing that there's life outside the US. When we first started doing this 5 or 6 years ago, I remember Ollie and I writing to all the schools, seeing if we could speak to anybody, and most often than not, we just got no response. But now, I think I'm right, Ollie, that we get much more traction because the schools actually realise that there's an opportunity outside of the continental US.
Yeah, I think we've had to that end, we've had Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney on the podcast. We had Brian Newberry from Navy on the podcast. we had Coach Ken, who's now at San Jose State, but he was at Navy at the time, on the podcast. And Navy, to Navy's credit, they were particularly good ahead of their visit to Ireland last year, and they let us speak to Coach Newbury. They let us speak to fullback Dabo Fofana. So there is that growing interest from schools to be part of things overseas, as you see the game become more popular, and the certainly the Ireland, the Aer Lingus College Classic series, gaining more traction. It's sold out for the second year in a row. When FSU and Georgia Tech come over next week, it's the second year in a row it's been sold out, and obviously last year it was 45,000 Notre Dame fans that sold it out coming over from America. But this year, I don't imagine Georgia Tech and FSU are bringing the same numbers. I think there's that local interest that's helped sell that game out this year, which is great to see.
And I think, not to go on about the demand, but the NFL's so established that it's logical. Ollie said the logical step is NFL draft college football, because people want to know where the players came from. But when Germany got the first NFL game, which I think was in Munich, when they put the second game on sale, there were 2 million people in the virtual queue. And I think that starts to tell you about the demand for football. And we really are seeing the demand for college football exponentially increase. I mean, it's now very noticeable how many people want to interact on a college football. So I think when you take even a portion of that, and bear in mind that college football is 25 years behind the NFL, then I think there is a real demand, and I think there's a real opportunity for it. And dare I say it, we're starting to hear about schools who not only interested in Ireland, but coming to other cities to play football.
I mean, it's exciting. I want to talk about the Ireland game, because obviously there'll be a Big 12 matchup there next year. We'll introduce you guys to what we call Farmageddon between Kansas State and Iowa State. Just learn that name now, Farmageddon. That's the name from it. It's wheat versus corn. Talking about the Big 12, when they announced that game, everyone was like, "What? Kansas State and Iowa State are going to play Farmageddon in Ireland? This is wild and crazy." And y'all are gonna. There will be Iowa State and Kansas State fans there, and I will be interested to see how much they try and outdrink the locals, because they can put a few back. I'm curious, you guys' perspective on the Big 12, and we could talk about college football in whole as the whole thing continues to change, and we might go longer than I originally planned, because there's a lot of conversation about national football and the direction it's going, and ties to the kind of the Premier League model and that sort of thing. But I want to start with the Big 12. Like, what are just you guys' thoughts on this new 16-team conference? We've got the we've got 4 who've been here since the Big 8 days. We've got a few more who are here for Big 12, one more who's been a Big 12 member for the last decade. We've got 4 teams in their sophomore year, 4 teams that are going to be new to the conference, although technically Colorado was part of the Big 8 and they left, and relationships are complicated. So I just really want your perspective on what are your thoughts on the conference, what it looks like now, kind of its place in college football, from you guys' perspective.
I'll be honest, I love it. I love what the Big 12 has done. And we talked about this, feels like almost before last season. The Big 12 moved quickly. A lot of people were disparaging of the moves the Big 12 made where college football realignment is concerned. When you look at that first instance of bringing in BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, people are like, these teams aren't Power 5 teams. Apart from obviously Cincinnati were coming off an incredible run in the AAC. But a lot of people were disparaging of that move. And then ASU, Arizona, Colorado, Utah came in. And you look at that in the context of, well, the Big Ten added Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC. Yeah, it seems like that's not quite such a great move, but I thought the Big 12 did a great job of adding teams that A, add value to the conference, and they did it at a time that B, kept the conference alive in the same way that the ACC didn't. So in the first instance, that was just great business, I thought, from the Big 12, and it shows the mindset that you see now with Brett Yormark. You mentioned the game in Ireland next year. Commissioner Yormark talking about a game in Mexico, how they can introduce the Big 12 to different markets, how they can enhance the Big 12 and make it a big player. And I think we talked about it on our show. Like, Brett Yormark is the guy that the Big 12 needed. And I think he's doing a great job, and he's taking that conference in a great direction. The on-field product I'm very excited about for the Big 12 this year. I think you look at potentially, I think there's upwards of 5, 6, 7, 8 teams have a legitimate claim that they could be the Big 12 champion come December. And who doesn't want to see that level of competition, right? You know, the ACC is not going to be that competitive. The SEC added Oklahoma and Texas. It isn't going to be as competitive in terms of how many teams can win the conference. The Big Ten is not going to have 8 teams that can win their conference this year. The Big 12 is in a unique place, I think, from an on-field and off-field standpoint in the college football world. I think it's great. I think it's exciting. You look at the schedule, look at some of the matchups. You know, you bring in a team like Utah, who've won 2 of the last 3 Pac-12 championships. I think it's a great time to be a Big 12 fan, and an exciting future for the conference too. Brett Yormark talked about wanting to be a top 3 college football conference. I think they're there already as we head into 2024 season. So yeah, I think it's very exciting personally.
And I think, you know, I'm not going to add much to that, to be honest, because I think that's fairly comprehensive, but I think that's your comparison. You look at what Brett Yormark's done with the Big 12 versus what George Kliakoff didn't do with the Pac-12, and look at the situation that the ACC finds itself in just now. I mean, there's just all this, you know, infighting and feuding. And I think Big 12 moved quickly and decisively to get to that point, which leaves them in a very, very strong position. And, you know, as I say, just to compare what could have been, you look at how the Pac-12 ended up, and arguably you could say, well, that's because the Big Ten, you know, flexed its muscles, but if the Pac-12 hadn't been weakened at that point, they wouldn't have been so quick to move, and that's what George Kliakoff was brought into that conference to do, to strengthen it, get a big media deal, make it, you know, one of the dominant conferences, and it's no longer. So I think a lot of kudos and a lot of you know, pat on the back to the Big 12 for what they've done.
I am curious, you guys' thoughts on this Kansas State-Iowa State game in Ireland next year. I will hope you both go, because, as I said, it's the best unofficial rivalry in the Big 12 between 2 teams that have played each other for years, don't like each other. The name for Armageddon is adopted by fans. It's not official with the schools. There's not an official trophy, but it's 2 very online fan bases who don't like each other, like, at all. And last year they had a classic. It was a snow game, and both teams were just running all over each other on the field. It was incredible. What are your thoughts on this matchup that we will see next year in Ireland?
I think it's interesting because I think there's the potential for it to be a very different matchup in 2025 than it will be in 2024 for a number of different reasons. Because I think with Iowa State, I've said this for a season or 2 now, it feels like Matt Campbell had that euphoric rise with Iowa State to the point where he was being talked about as being the next NFL guy. And then the program had a rough couple of seasons on the field. They've obviously had the issues off the field. And it doesn't feel like Matt Campbell is that guy anymore, if that makes sense. I don't think he's viewed externally and nationally at the same level that he was maybe 3 years ago. And I think as the conference moves and changes this year, enters this transitional year with the new teams coming in, I think there's a great chance for Iowa State to be competitive right at the very top. They've got a great team, some great players, on both sides of the ball, all 3 phases of the game. If you want to talk about punter Tyler Perkins, but we'll not spend all day talking about special teams. So they've got a strong team in a season where there's a lot of transition and moving parts. They should be super competitive, I think, this year. Well, if they're not, does questions start coming about Matt Campbell at Iowa State? Sorry. So yeah, I think there's that. Yeah, we've not made that mistake anywhere. But I think there is those questions start coming. So it could be a very different Iowa State that heads to Ireland in 2025. Kansas State, both those two teams should be conference challengers. They're part of that group that we talked about earlier. And there's the potential for there's no reason why those two teams shouldn't become the Texas and Oklahoma of the Big 12, where those two teams are constantly at the top. They're the two teams fighting out for a championship. So that game next year to open the season in week 0 could be a the reigning Big 12 champions Kansas State Wildcats playing on foreign soil to open the 2025 season. Could be the reigning Big 12 Iowa State Cyclones opening the season in Ireland. So many different storylines. And I think, again, it's a sign of what the conference has wanted to do, because they know those two teams are going to be competitive. They're going to be right at the top of the conference. They know what that rivalry means, as we've just discussed. So putting that game in Ireland to open week 0 next week, I think that's a big statement about what the conference wants to do and how it wants to kind of collapse the traditional borders of not just Big 12 football, but college football in general. And we come back to that game in Mexico that Brett Yormark, he wants to take a game down to Mexico. He wants to take a game to Ireland. And when you take a product to a different country, you hope you take the best form of it to that country. And in some respects, that's what the ACC is doing this year with Florida State and Georgia Tech, two teams who have the potential to be strong key players at the top of the ACC, battling out in Dublin in a week's time. So yeah, I think it should be a very exciting game and an exciting time for both programs.
Just to put a slightly different perspective on it, this is what college football is all about, and we've been talking about the rivalry and the history and all of that kind of stuff. And I always think, and listen, I'm a season ticket holder in London for the NFL games. Sometimes there's a little bit of, when the games are announced, we're not getting Kansas City versus whoever might be good in the NFL at that point in time, right? And I think with college football, it gives people the opportunity to learn the history and the rivalries and why this game means so much to the fans, right? So, and that really starts now or whenever the game was announced. I think it's a job of everybody, including ourselves, to let the audience know about why this is a really important historical matchup. And that's, as we all know, is the absolute beauty of college football and why we love it.
And I think that's a great point, actually, George, because you look at Notre Dame Navy last year, like that game was brought to Ireland because of Notre Dame. It was a huge tourism boost for Tourism Ireland. But when you break it down, how many people outside of Notre Dame and Navy knew what a big rivalry Notre Dame and Navy was? I don't think anyone in this country really understood that. So that game being on this side of the pond, understanding what that rivalry has meant to those two programs, I think, again, it just, to your point, George, it helps people understand how deep-seated these rivalries are, how passionate the fans are, how passionate the programs are, and the players that are on that field, how passionate they are about those rivalries and the sport as a whole. And I think it's just a great advertisement for college football as a whole.
And I think back to your point earlier, I think that's our job then. Our job is to let people know about why this is a fantastic matchup. And really to, promote that.
Well, man, I hope you guys are able to get Coach Kleiman and Coach Campbell on the show, because I think that'd be great. Both guys are good on mic, and if you can get Campbell rolling a little bit, he can be fun. Heck, get Brett Yarmark, but I'm so excited for that game. I love what you guys do. We could do this for another 2 hours. I could easily just sit here and not do any work and tell my wife and kids, sorry, you have to just go deal with things. I'm gonna hang out with my new friends from across the pond and talk college football. But I'm gonna go ahead and wrap us here, and we're gonna do this again because this is a ton of fun. Like I said, our partnership with Sports Social, I'd love to continue to help in the efforts to grow the college football fan base overseas. I think that's so neat. I think that having these games in Ireland is cool. If I can figure out, I got to save money for the kids' tuition, so I probably shouldn't go to Ireland for a college football game that doesn't involve my team particularly, but I'll see if I can convince the wife that it's worth a trip to, go over there. But do me a favor, guys. we mentioned the name of the podcast, but please plug it. Where can everybody follow you guys and the great work that you're doing to grow the sport over there across the pond?
Take it away, George.
Silence. So you can follow the College Chaps on X and Instagram. We're at the College Chaps. All of our podcasts are on Apple Podcasts, where we are the College Football Chaps podcast. And we've just started, we've been dragging ourselves into 21st century. We've just started putting our podcasts up on YouTube, so you can find us College Chaps podcast on YouTube. So we record weekly, certainly during the season. So we've kind of kicked off that weekly rotation, and I'm not going to give too much away, but we've got some pretty good guests coming up over the next few weeks.
Well, I like that.
Once again, George has not done a very good job of self-promotion. So George mentioned, I don't know if he mentioned at the top of the show, but George spent a little bit of time at SEC Media Days. So if you go to the touchdown.co.uk, you can find George's written musings about the SEC Media Days and his weekly column on everything the SEC. Sorry, this is probably the wrong podcast to
which is why I didn't mention it.
To promote this, but it's great. It's great written work, so check it out.
And sorry, while we're going to be here forever, Oliver obviously is the chief writer for College Football Network, so it would be remiss of me not to pay back the shout out.
Very nice. Okay, we'll wrap on this last question. What is the conference or the school or schools you have seen the most fans of start to kind of grow there in England?
That's a great question, actually.
It's really widespread, right? It's a bit bizarre. I got back from SEC Media Days. I haven't told anyone the story, but I'm back from SEC Media Days, and I had a shirt like this, which had the Longhorns logo on it, and I bought it because it had the SEC badge on it. And all the way through Austin Airport and London Heathrow, not a word. And when I got to Glasgow Airport, I got the first hook 'em horn shout that I'd had in 3,500 miles. It's bizarre. You can go out to the supermarket on a Saturday and see. I've seen Iowa State stuff. I've seen Oklahoma. I go back to my point. I think a lot of people pick stuff up when they're on vacation. So Florida, the state of Florida, UCF, Miami. There's some Facebook pages in the UK. UCF seems to have a very large fan base. I'm assuming that's because of the Orlando connection. Brits love to go to Disney World. But they're all over the place. I got called out. I was standing in the queue to get a beer at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for one of the NFL games, wearing an Alabama hat, and an LSU fan called me out for doing that. So it's pretty widespread. I mean, Ollie's a Boston College person, so, they're everywhere.
George had his Baylor shirt that he showed us, and Ollie's wearing a Pistol Pete, which is very dear to my heart. So let me just, as an OSU fan, Big 12 fan, but I bleed orange. So, guys, again, this has been great. Thank you so much. We are doing this again. You mentioned there's a bunch of UCF fans. I'll have to connect you with our UCF podcast. I think they would enjoy the conversation as well. So, everybody, the College Chaps, go check it out. We'll get you guys back on. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It took a few months, but a guest that I was really hoping to have on the show again this year is back, and I am thrilled for it. If you listen to the Shutdown Fullcast, and I do, not every episode, I got to be honest here, but I listen to a lot of them.
I mean, you value your own brain. That's only, I understand.
I have too many podcasts to listen to, and so I have to pick and choose. I don't know that there's outside of my fantasy football obsession. I'm not sure there's a show right now that I listen to every single episode of. I have to.
Sure.
But that is the voice of Ryan Nanni back here on the 10-12. Ryan, welcome, sir.
Thank you. You said you wanted to talk in the off season, and in the strictest technical sense, we are coming in under the gun. So good job, I guess. Me, not really, but here we are all the same.
Look, the season hasn't started yet, so
that's true.
You know what? The due date, getting something turned in on the due date is still technically on time. Okay,
that counts. Yes,
you don't get a grade bump for pulling it in a week early, right? The
That's
teacher's
true.
like,
That's
good
true.
job, suck up. Like, you're gonna ask for homework at the end of the day too. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So, I have a random smattering of topics, and one that has been near and dear to my heart, and I don't feel like people have appreciated nearly enough yet, is these new conferences are going to not only present us with first-time matchups. As I've said, there are 8 first-time in college football history matchups in the Big 12 alone this season, and there's others across like the SEC and the ACC for sure, and the Big 10. And so I want to talk about some nationally, but I want to start in the Big 12. And some of them are first-time matchups, and some of them are just like, if I told you 10 years ago that these two teams could be potentially playing to appear in a conference championship game together, you would have said, put the bottle down, sir. I need to know from you, looking across the Big 12 schedule, like, what are some of the, like, if you were to rank the just weirdest, this is a conference game in the Big 12 this season, which ones for you stick out the most?
So if we're sticking to that, like, you're telling this to yourself 10 years ago framework.
Mm-hmm. Even 5 years ago at this point.
Yeah, that's true. That this would work even better maybe for 5 years ago. I'm going to go with a game that's not unexpected, and certainly a game that is not being played for the first time, not even close to it. If you had told me Utah is going to play BYU in a Big 12 game, I would have so many questions. Number one, I would be like, why is Utah in the Big 12? They're still pretty new to the Pac-12. What happened? Did it go poorly for Utah? Did Utah get kicked out of the Pac-12? Second, I think people forget, because when it happened a couple years ago, it just sort of like happened quickly and nobody really made a big fuss of it. But for years, the idea of BYU leaving independent status and being in a conference, which they had done before in like the 70s and 80s and early 90s, was just thrown around as like, that can't happen. Like, the politics of it are weird, and figuring out like how they're going to line it up with a religious schedule and this, that, and like, it was just like, no, you can't put, and now it's just fine. So that's when it sticks out to me that, like, I think I would probably have the most questions of like, what happened to get us here? If you want one that's just like, what are we talking about? Colorado Cincinnati is really good. It's because it's the same thing with Utah of like, but you left, and with Utah, it's, Utah, it's just sort of like, okay, you've jumped conferences several times, whatever. Colorado leaving the Big 12 was a very big deal, especially because at the time it looked like, oh, this is the sign that everybody's going to the Pac-16. How is Colorado here? How is Cincinnati here? Why is this a conference game? Like, those are two that stick out to me as like really hard to grapple with from that. Because here's the other thing. When you phrase it to me 10 years, I was like, well, maybe there's a West Virginia game. West Virginia's been here longer than that. Like, weirdly, 10 years ago, me would have to just be like, yes, West Virginia is a Big 12 member. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know if that proves like conference realignment's weird and you can get used to it, or if West Virginia is like, yeah, sometimes you never get totally used to it on either side. Like, I don't think anybody has fully, and almost every conference has a team like this. I don't think everybody has like fully embraced Big 12 member West Virginia as a concept.
So you've hit a couple of points I've got to touch on.
Yes,
we'll start with the West Virginia one.
Please.
And the more I talk to West Virginia fans, like, even West Virginia fans are like, thank you for not leaving us out in the, in the cold, barren,
in the Big East cold
Russian wasteland of college football. But also like, man, we sure would rather play Pitt and Penn State and Big East rivals every year. Not Cincinnati. Cincinnati's not a rival. Don't call them that. West Virginia gets very upset. Look at the record. Look at the Penn State record, but you call that a rivalry. But like, West Virginia fans still like and I think that they're better now. Like, I really think like the last few years have really brought all of Big 12 fandom like together. It really is that like, we can pick on each other, but if you talk any crap to us whatsoever. We will virtually pummel you into oblivion. Only the truest sickos, delusionals, are the ones who are able to survive the onslaught on Twitter that we will descend upon you and your family and your friends. So, like, West Virginia, but I get it. It's still kind of like, yeah, they're in the Big 12. Mm-hmm. It's not like a Big 12. Like, we talk about the angry 8, the 8 that are left over. We're really like, it's like even the Texas schools to some extent. You're like, yeah, but it's really like OSU, Kansas State, Iowa State, Kansas. Like, we can even talk about Texas Tech because they've been in the Big 12 the whole time. West Virginia's still kind of there. So I get that mindset of like, is it ever really going to be normal for those of us who remember like we've now reached the age of like, back in my day, West Virginia and Rich Rodriguez, and you're like, all right, Grandpa, go sit down and watch TV. The BYU Utah thing. It's not just that it's weird that they're in the Big 12.
Yes.
It's weird that they're in the same conference, period. And like, I have had told to me by multiple people, like, one of the reasons that it's believed that Utah fans have been so anti-Big 12 is that they have to go they're being drug into joining a conference that not only is BYU there, BYU is there before them. It's not like Utah got there first and then said, fine, you can invite BYU. Like, BYU is already there, and they're going, they're at the airport as the plane is landing going, welcome. Come and join our conference. It doesn't matter that BYU's been here for 1 year.
Utah is showing up to the wedding a little late, looking at the seating chart and being like, are you serious?
You put us at BYU's table? And they ate all the shrimp. The jerks. I'm sorry. They drank all the Dr. Pepper. So, like, I get all that. Colorado-Cincinnati is great. Like, it's not technically a first-time matchup. They played once in 1972. But, like, Colorado-Cincinnati, Arizona-West Virginia, and Utah-UCF are the three that I'm like, in what world should those three teams be in a conference together that's not Conference USA? Like that, you say Conference USA, you say, okay, that makes sense. I mean, the world has exploded and Conference USA just has 100 teams in it. But like, they're in a what? They share a conference? Those teams
They all sound like December 22nd bowl games.
Yes.
Is what they sound like. Like a game you'd want to watch.
Absolutely.
And a game you'd be like, oh, that's interesting. They don't sound like these are conference foes with shared values and history and all of that.
Shared history is always said with air quotes. I know that podcasting is a visual medium, so everyone can see that. But you can mentally be like, you said shared history. I see the air quotes. I know they're there. It isn't understood. It is the Big 12 is weird. No, but every conference, like outside of the SEC, is weird now. And the SEC just has
the SEC is still weird. Yes. It's just, it looks less weird comparatively.
On a map.
Like it is weird. It is weird that Oklahoma's in the SEC.
Yes.
It is weird. But it is less weird than Oregon being in the Big Ten.
Okay.
Or Stanford being in the ACC.
And this is where I want to transition to everything else, because it's like, Big 12, you guys don't make any sense. I'm sorry, hold up a second. Let's just make sure that we understand this. That the Big 12 looks weird. The ACC has two Pacific Coast teams and a team from Dallas that's not getting a paycheck just so that they can get invited.
Yeah. The
Big 10, forget the fact that the Big 10, and to the West Virginia, the Big 12 point, has Maryland and Rutgers, which will always be ACC teams. Or Big 10 East, whatever.
Rutgers would love to be an ACC team in its past. But
now you have USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington. And not only did you pick two teams from the West Coast, or four teams from the West Coast, did you pick four teams that are as far from each other on the West Coast, like north to south, as you possibly could?
Yeah. I guess it's a little better adding Oregon and Washington than just having originally how it was originally set up with just USC and UCLA. Like, that would have always felt more like the ACC plan. Here's our weird California outpost, and sometimes you got to go to it. Sorry, tough to deal with. Yeah. So I mean, I guess the good news is we're now in my favorite phase of realignment, and this has happened like 4 times at this point, where the conferences are all like, well, we're done. We're going to be done for now. You're done until you're not when it comes to conference realignment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if things really blow up with Clemson and Florida State as they're suing the ACC, somebody may do something there. I know, like, right now, every conference is like, well, we're waiting and seeing what happens. But the way this actually works, I think most of the time, is you make a move in conference realignment because you're trying to jump somebody else. You are trying not to be last in line. Like, the Big 12 was, I think, did a very good job of not being absolutely last in line the way the Pac-12 was. But the Big 12 definitely was making reactive moves. And I don't think most conferences want to be in that situation. I think the SEC would rather, for instance, say, like, we are affirmatively bringing in Clemson and Florida State than having to sort of panic and being like, I don't know, West Virginia and UVA or UNC. What should we do here? Like, so maybe we don't have to like grapple with the weirdness of it too much, because in the next 5 years it'll just all change again.
But it's only going to keep getting weirder. And like at this point, I forget which commissioner made the comment of like, we're not going to bring any school in. No, you just don't want to be the bad guy again, because you were just the bad guy last time for trying to almost destroying the Big 12 and then actually destroying the Pac-12. And so you don't want to be the villain. So it's like, we're not going to incentivize them to leave. But when they do, I mean, we're not going to say no.
We would pick up the phone,
right?
Of course.
Like Clemson, Florida State, you're good. I know North Carolina is probably going to get picked up somewhere. The story I've heard is like they were supposed to go to the SEC, and then they decided not to, and so that's the only reason that Missouri is now in the SEC, is because North Carolina said, "Nah, we're going to stay here in the ACC." A decision I'm sure that they're thrilled they made this point.
Yeah.
Okay. So with that in mind, and because we've talked about weird matchups, shout out to FB Schedules. I do love them. They are the go-to for trying to like figure out non-con matchups and schedules and everything in the future. I appreciate it. But they put out an article.
I love the helmet schedule. The helmet schedule I have to live and die by, especially now that it's like I have to scroll the helmet schedule.
Who's wearing who and when? Okay. Is that a con? Oh, and you get, Utah, Baylor, and Arizona, Kansas State this year. That is conference game, but it's a non-conference game. So that's also very helpful.
Sure. So Houston's playing Oklahoma this year. It's not a conference game now.
It's yay. They put out this like most anticipated first ever meetings in college football, and I'm not gonna they didn't put any Big 12 games in here, and I don't mean to make fun of them, but there's a couple they included that feel like this article was written by the members of the Sickos committee, and there's 2 I want to highlight as like, this is a conference game. What is happening? One is Indiana at UCLA. Please help me understand how Indiana at UCLA is an anticipated first time matchup in college football.
So I was almost there until you said the last 2 words. College basketball?
Yes, absolutely. Sure. Yes, perfect.
Like,
got it.
We can all get on board for what these programs were and hope to be again. Yeah, I mean, Indiana fans get to go to the Rose Bowl. That's the thing that's going to get thrown out a lot about like these schools that haven't, either haven't been to the Rose Bowl recently, or maybe haven't been to the Rose Bowl at all for the capital R, capital B Rose Bowl, get to go now. I can tell you from talking to UCLA fans, it's a very different experience. It's not the same thing as we are going to play on January 1st. It doesn't mean it won't be fun, and it doesn't mean that the weather won't be awesome, but that's what I got for you.
Is that like driving the what's it, National Lampoon's Vacation, except that you get there just to look at it, and then it's not open, you just drive.
Brew it out front, should have told you.
Okay, there's actually 3 in here. One of them is Stanford at Syracuse. Speaking of weird conference games.
I mean, sure. Like, that's, yeah, man. Stanford, it's not Stanford that worries me so much with this, but like Cal is interesting to me, and SMU to some extent as well. Cal and SMU, I'm like, well, these are programs that like maybe, I mean, SMU won their conference last year. Cal had some good wins down the stretch and is always like under the current leadership is always like, are they about to figure it out or no? Like Jaden Ott's an awesome running back. I am curious to see how it goes, and I'm remembering like the when Mizzou won the East 2 years in a row shortly after they joined the SEC. Like, what's gonna happen if like Cal comes through? I don't think Stanford's ready to do it this year, but what do you do if you're an ACC team and you're like, oh cool, Cal won 5 conference games this year. We hate this. This sucks. This is deeply unpleasant for it. That's the part of realignment that I think people aren't always ready for, because most of the time, at least at the beginning, when you have new schools come in, they kind of struggle. Like that was certainly true with the Big 12 last year. The schools that came in, like it took a while before one of them took a conference win, especially a conference win that wasn't off one of the other new schools. But like if you have like, I don't know what Nebraska thought they were going to do in the Big 10 and what they went to a conference championship game early and all that. Like, I think it kind of sucks. I think it's kind of a bad time for everybody who's a legacy member. I would be delighted if Cal won the ACC this year. I'm not going to lie.
Oh my God. As much as I'm going to just trash talk on SMU fans, like SMU winning the ACC this year would be the funny, the team you just let in and you aren't even paying, just like shows up and wins the conference, like wins the conference championship game over like Clemson. Like, could anything get Clemson to like pay their lawyers more to get them out faster than SMU beating them in the conference championship game? Like, this is, what have we become? Where are we today? Okay, the last one I have to mention is this is the most like, I keep saying Sickos Committee. If the Sickos Committee were to drop a conference game back in like 2008, it's Rutgers at USC.
That is also, what is the kick time of that game?
It's October 25th, so I don't think there's a kick time yet.
I think it has one. I think it's like, I think it's like,
okay.
I think it's like 9 p.m. I think it's like 7 p.m. Pacific or something like that. Like it's a night game locally, which means it's like on in the middle of the night on the East Coast something.
It is a Friday night Fox game with an 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time kickoff. So for Rutgers fans, the game will not kick off until 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, at least I will say this in a partial defense of this game and others like it existing. At least college football can occasionally spit out something that you're like, what is happening here? Why does this exist? Like, you can't get that in the NFL. You can't get that in pro sports. It's just like, yeah, I understand. The best you can do is like, oh, we're having a baseball game at Bristol Motor Speedway. Cool, whatever. But like, Rutgers has to play at 11 p.m. Eastern time against USC. And because it's USC, the current vintage, we might have to watch it to see if Rutgers beats USC in the middle of the night. Like, I see the appeal there, but you're right. It is a very Sickos-based appeal.
Make sure you don't have plans for Saturday morning, except to sober up. Okay. Now that we've made fun of everybody, the Big 12 is 16 teams this year.
Yeah.
We've got 4 programs in their sophomore season. We got 4 programs in their freshman year. Yes, I'm calling Colorado as a 4 as a freshman. You've been gone for long enough. It's, you're not really the Big 12 college.
Your credits don't transfer anymore.
They don't. We've what is it? Forget it. I can't think of the term. We'll just move on. Looking at this Big 12 and this wacky schedule and weird games and 8 first-time all-time matchups, 5 of which include UCF, no surprise there. Like, What excites you most about the Big 12 conference, like this year and this 16 team thing that exists now?
I'm going to defer on the second question because I want to see how it shakes out before I know like what to make of the Big 12. I think, well, I'll kind of answer it. I think there is a chance that the Big 12 has successfully navigated things such that you have your Big 2, the Big 10 and the SEC, but they have done enough to stay in the conversation nationally that people are like, you can't completely write this conference off. You can't treat them the way we treat Conference USA, the Sun Belt, the MAC. Like, and I think there are plenty of fans of those programs who are like, we get way too little, or those conferences that are like, we get way too little credit for the quality of football we play. But the Big 12 doesn't want to be considered in that level. And I think they are like holding serve, so to speak, with who they have added and what those teams look like right now and in the like very short-term future. What I'm excited about for this season is like the wide openness of it all. Like, you could give me, I don't know, I honestly don't know if there's a conference championship matchup that you could give me that I could say, I can't see that path. I can't see how that happens. There are maybe a couple where I'm like, this is a real stretch. Like, if you gave me Arizona State, BYU, I would say like the way those programs are right now, I don't think you can do there. But like for every other conference, or at least I would say definitely the Big 10 and the SEC, and to some extent the ACC, the permutations are like, here are the 6, maybe 7 matchups that we think are on the table. The Big 12, it's much larger than that. It's like probably 30 matchups at least that you could say like, yeah, there's a plausible case for this. Like, Kansas and Kansas State are both really interesting. That doesn't usually happen in the Big 12. Oklahoma State is still really interesting. Of the schools coming in, like, Arizona had a great season last year. I know they've lost their coach, but like it's still like a promising start. Colorado is a wild card that's probably the most diplomatic way that I can put it. Utah has an incredible track record over the last 5 years. The schools that the sophomore schools that you mentioned, like UCF is kind of in that, like, are they, they have a really interesting transfer quarterback coming in. Are they about to sort of like unlock things there? Is Gus like going to start pouring gas on the offense? Cincinnati, like Scott Satterfield really better get that program in a better position. Houston made what I think was a really good hire. Yeah, it's like it feels like a little bit of an embarrassment of interesting things to look at in the Big 12. And as a result, like I think it will be appointment viewing very deep into the season. Like obviously losing Oklahoma and Texas sucks from a brand and finance standpoint. But for better or worse, for a lot of years there, the national conversation of the Big 12 kind of depended on, did Texas fall on its face during the regular season, and did Oklahoma fall on its face during bowl season? And those were kind of the two waypoints that a lot of people pointed to sort of say, this is what the Big 12 is. You don't have to worry about that anymore. If Texas and Oklahoma aren't good this year or struggle this year, it won't be a reflection on the Big 12 at all. And I think that's probably to everyone's benefit, because when they were good, it's not like it got that much hype or attention to the conference. It was just like, well, those are special programs. Those are programs that like are exceeding the rest of the conference in every way. So maybe there's a silver lining to it. I don't know. That sounds dreadfully naive of me, I should admit.
No, I've thought a lot about this of like, I think it's okay. And I know from like a TV standpoint, a TV number standpoint, and a making money standpoint, you want the casual viewers. You are going to lose casual viewers because of OU and Texas is exit. Because a lot of times the casual viewers are just going to tune in for the big game, the Alabama LSU,
the brand name game. Yep.
And you're going to lose a lot of those unless you have teams late in the season who are ranked in the top 10. And so it's a matchup where people are like, no, you need to watch this because these teams are vying for the playoff, right? And I do think the Big 12 will have some of those because that race will be so interesting down the stretch. Where I think you're going to trade in is more college football diehards and more of the betting audience, because there's so much more. There's going to be so much insanity. There's going to be so much craziness. There's so many games, like talking about like it matters more. Like every game's really going to matter in the Big 12 because it's so weird. There's not going to be 3 or 4 teams that just dominate this conference every single season. Like it really is going to be a wide open conference, which has already been. Like we've had in the last 4 Big 12 titles, 7 different teams have made the championship game. Like Oklahoma State's the only repeat. And so like this idea that like, well, it's going to be this wide open, well, it's already been that. Even with Oklahoma and Texas in the conference, like it's not something going to, oh no, now it's going to settle down into 1 or 2 teams going to dominate. No,
right?
Because it's a development league that experiments and likes to stay ahead of the curve and on offense or defense and then everybody copies it and throws 5 stars at it. The SEC just goes, hey, the Big 12 is doing is really successful. Let's take that and just throw 5 stars at it. The Big 12's like, fine, we'll go do this thing over here so we can beat your 5 stars. It's such a fun thing. And I get it. For casual people who just watch the big games and aren't like college football fans, that's fine. And if you're a college football fan of your team, you don't watch a lot of other college football much either. You care about your team. But for the people who just like people who love Maction, who love weird games, and the people like you and people that listen to Shutdown Fullcast or listen like me, who's like, I will watch as much as I can. I don't know how you don't watch the Big 12 and be like, yeah, these games are going to be insane. Our friend Kelly Ford put out his like teams with the number of like projected 1-score games. Colorado's like number 1 with 10. Was it 7? It was 11 Big 12 teams. 11 of the 16 Big 12 teams have 7 or more games currently projected to be 1-score games.
Yeah. Like, so here's the downside to it. If you are in this because you like to see a 2019 LSU or a 2021 Georgia, if you're like, I want to see one of the greatest football teams in college football history, it's going to be harder for that to exist in the Big 12.
Yes.
Like that is the trade-off. They like the parity and the distance between top and bottom is a lot narrower, but if you are looking, or even, like a 2000 Oklahoma team, like it's you're probably not going to find that in the Big 12. And that I think goes back to the distinction you're making about like, if you are a more casual fan and you are looking for like, who are like the top 5 teams and what games are they playing, most week it's probably not going to be a Big 12 team. If you are more interested in like who's fighting for life from like, I don't know, 20 to 35, that ranking, the Big 12 is probably going to do you pretty well.
If you like 2022 TCU,
yes,
like lots and lots of 1-score wins, goes undefeated and then makes a playoff run that's out of nowhere.
Yeah.
The Big 12 is the conference for you. If you like 2021 Oklahoma State, if you like, because honestly, like we've done the math, like the teams that make the Big 12 championship game, if you want to see teams that win a lot of close games, if you like close games that come down to the wire, you should be watching the Big 12. You should not be watching Alabama win 8 games by 2 or 3 touchdowns, or Ohio State running through the Big 10 West. Like, you should be watching the Big 12. If you're just going to go watch Ohio State pummel Purdue, but now on the flip side of that, you're not going to get the, Kentucky beats number 1 ranked undefeated Georgia, right?
Sure.
You're not going to get that because you don't have the Georgia for that to be a thing. So we're not going to hear about the biggest upsets in college football is
right.
Like,
Kansas is not going to beat Texas.
Oh no, I know.
you know,
No.
and it was really fun when Kansas beat Texas. It was really fun. It was really fun when Kansas State was consistently beating Texas.
Charlie
right.
Strong beat Texas. Okay, can't be that hard.
Like, you're right. Those are the things that are going to. I mean, the other downside to this is, I think, inevitably going to be, and we haven't seen it too badly, but it feels like it's going to start to creep up. I feel like non-conference schedules are really going to start to shrink. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if the SEC eventually is like, okay, we have to go to a 9-game conference schedule for everybody. I feel like the incentive to play interesting non-conference games is going to go away a little bit. Arizona brought their rival with them. Utah has their rival already there. Colorado will keep playing Colorado State. Maybe the Nebraska series will keep going. But I think there is going to be a little bit of like, one thing I think that the Big 12 had done a pretty good job of was giving us, not just at the top, but all through the lineup, like, okay, let's watch Kansas, Illinois, or let's watch Oklahoma, Tennessee before that was a conference game. And I have a feeling those things will be fewer and farther between as we keep going.
Yeah, that's more of a reflection on college football that stinks. Of like,
yes,
I talked about this on the show last week. I'm like, the Big 12's got to do a better job in non-conference scheduling. But like, week 1 used to be big, and it's not. 11 Big 12 teams are playing FCS teams in week 1.
Yeah,
and I'm not going to complain about college football. I'm going to watch it. Like, I'll take whatever you're going to give me. But like, if you're going to own Labor Day weekend, then own Labor Day weekend. Like, let's or make week 0 a thing, and so that becomes, we get more week 0 that's FCS and whatever, and then we get week 1 and Labor Day weekend being a marquee thing again, because like we've got to get. And then week 2's loaded. And that's the thing, is like week 2's loaded. So let's just make week 0 a thing so we get more good stuff on week 1, because it's the second game of the season for a lot of teams. Right? And then we have a whole weekend of marquee stuff, as opposed to everyone's got a week 2 game that's big, and I'm trying to figure out how to watch 4 of them in a day, and I want to watch 20. But, okay, we'll wrap up on this. When you joined us last year, we ended on or talked about like what would be the funniest Big 12 title game matchups, and you had some good West Virginia jokes for us, and I appreciated that. So now I have to end this on the same thing, Ryan. What would be the funniest Big 12 championship game matchup in Arlington in December?
God,
be warned, I'm gonna clip this and put it everywhere.
No, yeah. This is all right. I feel like I have to put UCF in there. Like, it's still just, UCF is a lot of fun, and UCF it could go on that run this year. UCF has to play Florida. They might beat Florida this year. I'm processing that on my own time. Thank you. But I think if you put UCF in the Big 12 championship game in Texas, it immediately sends some what the hell is going on here? And if I have to pair them with somebody, I know they play in the regular season. I know we already talked about it, but yeah, I think give me Colorado. I think this would just make so many people mad, because you have new money Big 12 and UCF, that it's sort of like, we just took you because we needed to stop the bleeding. How dare you? You have Colorado in all of its current Colorado-ness coming in. And I think people need to reckon with what Colorado looked like going 4-8 last year. If Colorado flips the script and goes 9-3 or 10-2 this year, I don't think we were really prepared. I would stay as far away from a Deion Sanders press conference as you possibly can in that situation. But I think what really entices me about a Colorado UCF Big 12 championship game is it would get a lot of attention, which is something the conference has to want. But if you're a legacy member of the conference, you have to be like, I hate this so much. everything that's happening here. And worst of all, it's not even a good clash of colors. It's not even a good color matchup on television.
We would have to force UCF to wear the Citronaut colors in that.
Yes,
game.
they'd have to wear their like special space uniforms for the game or something.
And gold. Like
no.
So you're gonna wear your Citronaut blue and white UCF, and Colorado can wear like black and gold. We can't have two black and gold. I think I really liked Andy Staples put out his like 16-team playoff or 14-team playoff or 12. I don't know how many teams did playoff. And it had two Big 12 reps, and it was West Virginia and UCF. And I was just like, oh, can you imagine two essentially East Coast teams playing a conference championship game in Arlington, Texas? Is that like that's the most like it was like no, you didn't take this step far enough. Those two teams would have probably played each other in a Big 12 title, and that might be one of the funniest things I could possibly imagine is West Virginia and UCF. And it has nothing to do like against either team because I really like UCF this year. And I think Green's going to be fun for West Virginia. And it's just like that. It goes back to the like, what's the funniest matchup you can think of? Two East Coast teams in Dallas playing a conference championship game in the Big 12.
Can I give you Cincinnati, West Virginia?
Oh,
Big 12
my goodness. Beautiful. It's not a rivalry. It's not a rivalry. Ryan, absolute pleasure. It was worth the wait. Thank you so much for hopping in here. Obviously, plug the Shutdown Fullcast, but I know that you and Stephen Godfrey, Split Zone Duo, have been working on a air quotes again because podcasting is a visual medium. Secret project. Plug it all, man.
Keep an eye out for it. We don't have anything to point you towards yet. We're working on it very hard. It's going to be, I think, a very fun project that, how can I describe it? Will help you sort of reckon with everything that has changed about college football in whatever time frame you want to define. Like, we're going all the way back to, in some cases, the 1960s. So it's hopefully going to be a fun, informative, and maybe helpful look at how much the sport has changed and why, and the people that have made all of those changes. And yeah, other than that, thank you for having me. And if I will say this, if we get a West Virginia Cincinnati Big 12 championship game, I'll come to that game.
Oh yeah,
I'll come watch that in Arlington.
Yeah, we'll get you back on here because that would be. Can I just say that as someone who listens to both Shutdown Fullcast and SZD, that cross, if you were to do the like 2-pie crossover thing, I'm pretty sure all of us who listen to both are on an FBI watch list somewhere. So
yeah, but it's probably not a like danger watch list. It's like, oh man, watch list.
Yeah, just keep both shows going if you wouldn't mind, because I'm afraid what our hobbies would be if we didn't have fewer shows.
I can do that. I can serve our country in that way.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.